Ladies and gentlemen, it is 5 a.m. here and I'm deciding to write a review of ZZZ instead of going to sleep. I have finished all the content Zenless Zone 0 currently has to offer at level 27. I'd like to give you my first impressions on the game. I'll come forward and say that I wasn't a fan of this game when I first saw it, but I figured I'd give it a fair shot anyways. I may be biased, but I'll try to be as unbiased and fair as possible with my review of this game. Let's start with the pros of this game. The aesthetic is amazing, it looks super polished and clean, the UI is very nice, the characters look pretty, the effects look pretty, the entire game is just a very well polished, good looking game. Of course, aesthetic comes down to personal preference, but I think it looks great. The only small issue I have is that some animations look a bit too elastic, but other than that, the game is gorgeous. Next up, the sound design in this game is great. The music is great, the sound effects are great, and the voice acting is great. Hoyoverse has a good standard of their sound design in all their games, considering the music, sound effects, and voice acting in almost all their games are amazing. There are a few issues here and there, but I'll talk about that later into the video in the cons section. This one might confuse some people, but I think the combat is both a pro and a con. It might be brain dead and really easy, but the combat is flashy. It's pretty exciting to see all of the switches and the ultimates and the visual effects go off in this game. Even if it's super easy, some people like that. If you like flashy combat, you'll definitely enjoy the combat in this game. And to be fair, being easy isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes people just want an easy game to unwind with after a long day. Next pro is how fast the dailies are. Dailies in gacha games need to be quick, otherwise it'll get really annoying to have to log on over and over again every day, going through your chores. But in this game, they're nice and fast, which is quite a relief. The last pro I have is that the character interactions are quite good. The banter between the siblings and the banter between the cunning hares is quite entertaining. Seeing them mess around with each other is quite nice. There's also the interactions between the two sisters, Kaleda and Grace. I really enjoyed the interactions between them and how their family bond showed. It carried the last part of the story for me personally. Now moving on to the cons, let's get the first one out of the way. Hoyo is not generous. No Hoyo game has been that generous other than Honkai Star Rail, which seems like a one-off. Honkai Impact 3rd is not generous in the slightest, it's extremely punishing and very whale bait. Genshin Impact is not rewarding in the slightest, they treat their players horribly. I'm sorry, but they just don't compete with the generosity of gacha games such as Nikke, Wuthering Waves, Reverse 1999, Brown Dust 2, and quite a few others. They need to keep up, otherwise they're gonna fall behind and be left in the dust. Sure, Hoyo may make quality games, but other developers are starting to make other high quality games as well. Next con is the performance issues. This game has had a surprising amount of performance issues with the mobile incompatibilities, the issues with Intel, the optimization issues. Personally, I haven't had those issues whatsoever, and my PC is pretty bad. The game feels optimized well to me, but I've seen on the internet that tons of people are having tons of issues with this game, which is really surprising. I'd expect a lot better from Hoyo. They're a multi-billion-dollar company after all. Next con is going to be extremely subjective, but I don't like any of the character designs. Not a single one. Yes, this is very subjective and this is my personal take, but this is also my review. I don't like any of the characters and I hope they improve because, quite frankly, none of the characters in this game grab my attention whatsoever. This next con is also going to be somewhat subjective. The story is bad. It's a ton of yapping for a game where I'd expect the story to be short and sweet. Some people may enjoy the story due to the character interactions, and I did enjoy it as well at the beginning, but after chapter 1 it becomes a massive yap fest. The only time the story ended up recovering was at level 26, when I ended up doing the Bellabog Industries quest part 2 with the two sisters. I felt like that quest was great. Overall though, the story was a slog with some specific parts being good, and then it's kinda just bad in most of the other parts. To add insult to injury, during the main story quest, there are multiple parts where the dialogue is unvoiced. And that brings me to my next point. Hoyoverse is a billion-dollar company. Are you going to sit here and tell me they seriously decided to add visual novel segments to the story? I'm sorry, but we're in 2024, playing a game by the most profitable gaming company on the planet, and they're giving us visual novel portions of the story? I know Hoyo can do way better than that, and that's just insanely disappointing. And then there's also unvoiced parts of the story too. Is this a joke or something? Now the next con. The side quests are bad. I understand that side quests in all games are bad, but why does that make it acceptable? I should feel like I want to do them, rather than just doing them out of necessity. When doing side quests in this game, you're just an errand boy for multiple hours. It's pretty miserable. And again, for some reason our favorite billion-dollar company is not voicing their side quests. It's quite laughable, honestly. Now for my next con, the TV system. I won't say much about it. Everyone's already torn it to shreds. I knew it would be bad, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. Every time you do a main quest, you're forced into this boring system, and it's too slow even at 2x speed. What's even worse is when you combine the TV and the yapping, there's so little combat in this game that it just feels like 20% of the time or even less is combat, while the rest of it is just menu or TV. It's really miserable, honestly.
The fact that this is supposed to be quote-unquote better than how it was is insane to me, because this is fucking unbearable. I fucking hate these fucking goddamn fucking TVs. Like, oh god, I'm gonna fucking lose it, dude.
The TVs are so shockingly bad.
And finally, my last con. I said this before, but the combat is both a pro and a con. While the flashiness of the combat is nice, the fact that there's next to no challenge makes the combat feel like a joke. I understand we're in the early game and the combat will be easier in the early game. However, the fundamentals of the combat system are simply just flawed, and unless they change the fundamentals, the combat will always be too easy. If we take a look at this game's parry window, it's so forgiving that you can parry attacks even if you're an entire second early. On top of the forgiving parry window, we have infinite dodges. I don't think infinite dodges are a terrible thing, but when we have the super forgiving parry window and the infinite dodges, it feels like there's no room to make it difficult because you can barely mess up. Now finally, allow me to give you my ratings for the different aspects of the game and quickly explain my reasoning. Before I start though, I'll let you know that in my rating system, 50 means average, not 70, 100 means perfect, and 0 means unbearably bad. Aesthetic gets an 80 out of 100. I think this game looks amazing and super polished. The UI is very clean and I quite like how it looks. My only personal issue is, again, the elasticity of characters being over-exaggerated at some parts, making it look too cartoonish. And also I feel like the game looks a little childish for my taste, but overall, even with that, it still looks so good that it's way above average at a high 80 out of 100 for me. Next is the sound design. I think it gets a 65 out of 100, which is slightly above average. This game's sound design is pretty good, but there is one gripe that I mentioned earlier, which is the fact that this game has very repetitive overworld music. When you go into the overworld, there's different themes that play throughout the day. Different times of day play different songs. Each one, though, is a short loop, and the short loop plays over and over and over and over again. And having to listen to it on repeat without being able to change it means I'll have to subject myself to this over and over again every time I'm in the overworld, and I hate it. And that drops the sound design all the way from like an 80 down to a 65 in my books, because having to listen to this miserable loop of music over and over again is horrible, because it's so short that there's no substance to the songs whatsoever, and I cannot stand it. I know it's just a personal thing, but I hate it so much. The quality of life is a 65 out of 100. My main issue is that the stamina stages are manual. When you have to spend your stamina, you have to manually go into the stage and burn the stamina. I get it, we're supposed to play the stamina stages because it's combat and you want to enjoy the combat of the game, but after doing this over and over and over again every day, it's just going to feel like a boring chore. People are going to get tired of it very quickly, and they're just going to want to have the ability to skip over it. The story gets a 30 out of 100, which is below average. It's quite a yap fest. The only thing saving it from being lower than a 30 out of 100 is the fact that I really enjoyed the last part of the story with the Belobog Industries sisters. That was a great story, and that saves the score of the story from going even lower. There are some other good parts of the story, but that doesn't save the rest of it because there's just so much yapping, it's so terrible. The performance of this game on my end gets a 60 out of 100, which is above average. The game works well for me. It's quite well optimized, so I'm still boosting it to a 60 out of 100. However, it's not higher than that because it's been running very poorly for others, interestingly enough, which I was very surprised at, considering this is a Hoyo game and they have a reputation for having well-optimized games. The rewards are at 40 out of 100, which is below average. They're just not up to the standards of gacha games. They're not the worst though, at least it's not as bad as Fate, right? Now for the character design, this is subjective obviously, but I give it a 40 out of 100, which is below average. I just didn't really like the designs of the characters. The only thing saving the character design for me is, again, the Belobog sisters, because I really enjoyed their story. With all that being said, my final score for the game is 60 out of 100. It's slightly above average due to the polish of it being made by Hoyoverse, but there's still many disappointing aspects of the game. It kind of ruins the fun. I hope that Hoyoverse manages to improve the game, and I think they will, even though they don't have a good track record for improving their games, but I have faith, at least for a bit. I'll try and hold out and see if the game improves. If it doesn't, then I'll simply just drop it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.